So if you're looking for affordable, attainable, brand X big block muscle car power, right? There are very few things on earth that will give you as big a bang for the buck as a big block Buick. That's a lot of bees, Dallas.
I know.
I got it all out.
Put them all in there at one time.
So, the big block Buick. What year did these things?
First year was 67.
67, and they ran through what?
76.
76. And they're still out there.
Oh, plenty. Yeah.
But here's the thing about the Buick that sets it apart from everything else, in my opinion. They're torque beasts. Everybody knows that they're torque beasts. But what a lot of people don't realize is as big and as okay, like Buick, you think Buick and you think, you know, tons of chrome, giant cars, big, heavy, everything, right? Until you get to the big block Buick. And this thing is actually weighs like a small block.
It's 25 pounds more than a small block Chevy.
Okay, you're talking about something at 455 cubic inches that's 25 pounds more than a small block Chevy. It's crazy, right? But that's when Buick engineers laid this thing out, they did it in such a way to save as much metal as possible. So I know a lot of people, like right now, like the Cadillac, the 500 Caddy is like the darling of you know, brand X builds. And they're good motors, but they're heavy. They're hard to work with. They're not as easy to work with as the Buick. Nothing wrong with Pontiacs, nothing wrong with Oldsmobiles. But I'm telling you, bang for the buck, the Buick is the way it is. All those bees again. Bang for the buck, Buick. All right. So I want to break this into 3 different steps, 3 different installments, so that the video doesn't go on for hours, right? I want to do the blocks first. We'll go through the generations of blocks, right? Then we'll come back in a week or so, and we'll do the heads. We'll do the cylinder heads, and we'll cap it off by doing all of the stuff that goes around it, the crankshafts, pistons, and rods, and like all of the oiling system modifications.
Right.
Because that is like one of the weak links. That's one of the Achilles heels of the Buick, is the oiling system. So Dallas, you dug out a couple of blocks for us.
I did. So what I did was, when you're talking the later model big block Buick, because the earlier model was the nail head, right?
Right.
And
which is the exact opposite as far as
oh
the
yeah,
goes.
completely the opposite of this.
Yeah.
The block is super heavy. It's very robust and strong.
And nailhead weighs like a 426 anyways. They're like 700 pounds.
Yep.
But they're beautiful, right? It's just beautiful.
Oh yeah, by far. But you know, as it progressed through the muscle car era, horsepower was king, and the nailhead just couldn't do it with the way the valves were positioned in the head.
Right.
So they had mega torque, but they just didn't make any horsepower up top. So what Buick engineers did is they sat down, clean sheet of paper, and a few years before that they had introduced the 215, which we did the video on.
Right.
So a lot of these a lot of the updates on this engine were what they had learned from the 215 and carried it over. So what they did was the 215 was originally somewhat a thin wall casting, but it was a deep skirted block.
Okay.
They went over the top with the thin wall casting. GM was trying out the thin wall castings, and they weren't going to do it on the Chevrolet, which was the mass production model, right? Why fix a zillion cars on the road if you have a problem when you could fix a couple 100,000, right? So what they did was they started off with the thin wall casting in '67, which would have been the 400 and the 430. Now I don't have a 67 400, but this is a 69 400 motor.
Okay. Are there any functional differences between them?
No, it actually would look the same as any of the other ones.
So now here, if you come a little closer, right, you could see the way the casting kind of like hugs around the cylinder walls. You see the big spaces here between the lifter galleys of the lifter bores, the lifter galleys. They took metal away, like any place they didn't need metal, or any place they could shrink it away, they did.
And this open lifter valley thing is actually pretty good when it comes to breaking in cams, because you don't have much of a problem with oil getting on the camshaft.
Oh yeah, no,
right?
that's right.
It's draining straight back on it. So the big problems on the big block Buick is when they first started this, like I said, they started with the 215 as a design. And if you've ever seen the 215, it's just like the 350 and such. It has a bolt-on pickup down here at the bottom, which feeds oil through this hole in the block.
Let's roll it over.
Right? And so the pickup tube is actually part of the block, which starts here and ends at the timing cover up front. The problem is it's rinky-dinky. I mean, look at that pickup tube. That's a half-inch pickup tube. So that's one of the big problems with them. The later blocks, if you look at this 72 engine we have on the stand here, the hole here is considerably larger. It's 5/8 of an inch.
Okay.
And they realized they were having oil problems, so they updated the block to have a bigger oil pickup tube.
Now, so what's the reason for this kick out over here? Because this is a very unusual feature of these blocks. You see the way the oil pan rail
It kicks out.
Yeah.
I believe that was probably fitment in the car, to tell you the truth. Because when this came out, remember it's 67, okay? So 67, when this engine came out, you had the perimeter frames of the B bodies, but you were still using an X frame in the Riviera, right?
Oh, okay.
So they had to have a block that fit in both,
Makes sense.
right? And so the X frame cars were all rear steer, right?
Right.
So you would have had to move your sump forward, moving everything to the side to help out with oiling.
Okay.
But
Now, talking about oiling, I got to show this real quick. So, again, with oiling systems are the Achilles heel of the Buick, right? And if you come around here, come around this side, you'll see here's the oil feed hole for the cam bearing, okay? And you notice it's off to the side. Now, on almost every other engine you come across, it's going to be right through the center here, okay? But the oil feed hole is off to the side. And what happens is, a high wear Buick engine, or one that's got like crazy valve spring pressure, right, sees a lot of RPM, any type of oil starvation issues along those lines, and it'll automatically eat through the bottom of the cam bearing and into the block over here. So that's something, when you go through these engines, you have to inspect them. And the cam bearings that they sell for these, they're fully grooved?
yeah, TA sells a full groove cam bearing for them now, so that it passes oil behind the bearing instead of around the cam, because we had talked about that before with the groove in the cam,
Right.
and then the small bearing surface on it. It's just spewing oil out the front and the back of the cam bearing.
So if you're building one of these engines, you want to go with a fully grooved bearing, not just a regular standard bearing.
Right. So the other thing that is like blows your mind when you start looking at them, the very first one I did was when I flipped it upside down, I saw the 455 just had a little spindly casting holding the cylinder wall in, and I thought,
We have-
how? That's right here.
Okay.
So, but this is, let's see here. Okay, you can see it right there. These are little spindly castings holding the cylinder wall in.
They literally just, they got away with as little metal as they could in any way that they could.
Right, and you know, this was primarily done because, okay, so if we go back to the 400, when this engine came out in 67, you see how thin, you can see actually on the main caps, you can see right through them. The holes are open, right? And that's because the way it's cast, they save metal on each side of the main cap, on the main webbing.
Right. Now this is a problem if you're on an engine nitrous or boost, where you're going to get into a detonation situation, because like I first-hand knowledge on the Chryslers, they'll crack right here, and the crack tries to run up above the bolt hole.
The main, yeah.
Yeah, and then from there it'll run up the cylinder wall. So that's one thing. If you're going to own one of these engines, boosted, nitrous, any type of application where it may see extended periods of detonation, that's a serious issue.
Right. The other things, like if you look at the mains, you can see that. That's why I didn't clean this block up. Okay, I just pulled the main bearings out yesterday, and you can see the witness marks of where the actual holes for the bearings line up at. And you can see this one's off probably 1/8 of an inch. This one here is off 1/8 of an inch or more. That one's off 1/8 of an inch. This one's probably 1/8 of an inch.
Yeah, that's very F.E. Ford-like.
Right, and it was like, I still haven't figured out, every single one I put together, they're always off, and you're thinking, man, they're all off about the same amount. Why didn't you just adjust the tooling on it?
They did the same thing on the FEs, where it's off this way instead of off to the side. It's off front to back.
Right.
And the oil hole is half covered in the bearing.
Right.
So chamfering that is a big deal. If you're going to detail one of these blocks ready for a build, that's a big deal. Now, what about girdles?
Well, TA offers a girdle. TA Performance is pretty much your only place left to. You used to have Kenny Bell, TA
Sure.
Performance, Poston Engineering, right? Poston and Kenny Bell went blower, and then they haven't done any Buick since. TA bought up a lot of their stuff, and they reproduced a lot of the stuff. But TA Performance offers a girdle for it. But if you notice on this 400, there's no spindly webbing holding that cylinder wall in, and that's because this is a 4040 bore. And on the Buick 455, or on the Buick big blocks, all cubic inch was made up with bore. There's no stroke, there's no nothing else. They all have the same crank, they all have the same rods, right? But it's all made up with bore. So this one's a 4040 bore.
4" plus 40, like a 340 Chrysler.
Yep.
Okay.
And then this would be this is a 430, which the bore on it is 4187.
Okay.
And so it's a little bit bigger. It's supposedly rumored that they're really 400 blocks that are bored out, but they got a different casting number on it. And I think if somebody went through the trouble of making a different casting number, they probably made a different casting.
But they do get thinner down here at the overhang.
They do. And this block again doesn't have that, I don't know what you would call it, support for the cylinder wall liner.
Okay. And then that one is the 455.
455, and it's 4312 bore.
Okay. And you could see the difference in the thickness of the bottom of the liner there. Not liner, but the cylinder. They just kept getting thinner and thinner.
Right.
Do you know the weight difference between the 400 and the 455?
Actually, I don't. That was what I was hoping to do today, honestly.
Okay.
Because I kind of always wondered. Everyone says the 455 is so flimsy, right? People ran the 430s and they actually found that it ran better because it was a more sturdy block. But then you go to the 400, which has the smallest bore, which you would think has the most meat in it, right? And there was a lot of articles written about the 69 GS 400, how much of an animal it was, and that was before stage 1 heads and all that, right? There's a lot of things that people don't understand about the stage 1 Buicks. When the program came out, it originally was just camshaft, different carburetor, and a different distributor. Actually, the compression was the same. They're all 10 1/4. But when they went to the stage 1 program in '70, it became the stage 1 head. Plus, you got the cam, the distributor, carburetor, and fuel pump, and
well, I want to do heads in the next installment.
That's fine.
This one over here. Let's just focus on the blocks.
Okay.
So somebody's looking for one of these. They're looking to pick up a core motor. What should they be looking for?
Okay, so, well, generally on a core motor, the big things is, does it knock? If it knocks, it's probably going to need a crank. The good thing is, all of them use the same crank. So if you find a crank out of a 430, it's the same as a 455 or a 400.
Okay. Let's assume the thing doesn't run. They're going to tear it apart. Are there any characteristic damage areas where you might find cracks or stresses or weirdnesses?
Well, cracks? I'm not entirely sure cracks-wise. I've never really heard of them cracking. I think it's because they're so flimsy.
Possibly, yeah. You were saying when you assembled that engine that you actually had to jiggle the block
to get the crank
to fall in place.
Right.
I mean, we're talking a very loose assemblage of cast iron cores here, but they're strong.
It is. It's just strong enough. The big one is the main caps, because it's not a deep skirt block. The mains tend to walk around on them. Okay. And that's, I mean, you seen problems on your 426 video that you did.
Sure.
With the main walk on them, on that 426. But it's a deep skirted block, and it is much more robust than this.
But that's where at what point would you say a girdle is necessary on one of these?
I think it's, well, rule of thumb is anything over 6,000 RPM or 600 horse is when you're going to want to start looking at a girdle.
Okay.
Now, I do know a lot of it is when you tear up a Buick, most of it is main oiling issues, and the mains lead to the rods getting chewed up because they oil the rod, right? But the big one is like the volume of oil that you can flow through the motor, the better it's going to be. It has a big main journal. That's where they made up the strength in the motor was with the diameter of the crank main journal.
What is the diameter?
3 1/4.
3 1/4. It takes a whole quart of oil just
right. I mean, you just need an Exxon Valdez parked next to you as you're firing it up.
And that's the other shortcoming with these blocks. Like you said, the oil passages are all undersized.
They're all undersized.
Because they weren't expecting you to go out and run these things at 7,500 RPM. So
it's a Buick, right?
It's a Buick.
2,500, $3 grand.
Right. So all of the oiling passages in these engines are sized for cruiser type of performance. You know, like where 5,500 RPM is pretty much about max. But we'll go through the oiling system modifications when we get a little bit later on in the series. But I wanted to give people a quick rundown, you know, a look at these blocks. They really are different. You look at a Buick is different than any other Like nothing else resembles a Buick.
Right, they're pretty odd compared
They
to
are
the
odd.
run-of-the-mill all.
They are odd. But they're my favorite non-Mopar, you know.
Right. Well, I mean, I like them really just because of, one, the cost friendliness. They're very cost effective, you know.
Speaking of which, so typical complete big block core motor, what do you expect to spend?
Well, there's a couple variances in it, but around $500 for a core motor.
Okay.
And that's, if it's running, it's usually about $750,
Okay.
right? But if you start getting into the earlier stuff, like a 70 block, that's the most coveted because it has the highest compression and it's supposedly the best heads, which we're going to find out, you know. But the 70 blocks usually go from anywhere between $750 and $1,000.
Okay. And how common are they still?
You can probably pick one up almost on any given Craigslist ad or Facebook Marketplace ad.
There's still a good number of them out there to build.
And you know, when you go, if you find one that's rebuilt, $2,500 to $3,000 is about the going number.
All right, so next time around we're going to line up the cylinders. How many different variations of cylinder head are there?
No, well, there's actually like 5.
Okay.
If you take them all into account, but I don't have stage 2s.
Okay.
Right. And then a majority of them are just kind of what you would find on every LeSabre. You know, there's nothing big. All of the early stuff came with the odd things because it was the height of the Musclecar war, right? And then Buick was really trying to capitalize on the Wildcat being the, you know, the high-end performance car, the sport luxury car.
Right.
And so that's where they got the big port heads. You could even get Rivieras with stage 1 heads.
Now that was the one that they, instead of using the cubic inch of the engine, they used the torque rating of the engine as far as
That was a nail head.
That was a nail head.
Yeah, that was actually a time frame that Buick did that for even the small blocks. So the nail head, when they were originally, like, you know, in, let's say, early 60s cars, you open the hood and you're like, a 445 Buick, what the heck is that? Well, it's actually a 4-barrel 401, but it made 445 foot-pounds of torque.
Which leads to a lot of confusion because people are like, Buick must have built like 18 different size engines.
Right.
But they were really just...
The 401 was actually, the 401 had multiple different variants. The 425, if you found them in the ribbies, you could get the 425 was like, I want to say the big horsepower one was the 465, which was the 465 foot-pounds of torque. But I think it was only 340 horse or something.
They definitely marched to the beat of their own drummer.
They did, yeah.
All right, let's wrap this up now.
All right.
So, and in case you guys don't know, every Wednesday night, 7 o'clock Central Standard Time, we do a Wednesday night live tech talk here at the AHRA headquarters.
AHRA garage, yeah.
Right, now he is the American Hot Rod Association. So, yeah, next week we'll do the heads.
I don't know about next week, but
Next week, week after?
a little bit later.
Before
I'm
we're
trying to get something cleaned up, yeah.
All right, that's it, man. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
See you later.